The reason that a lot of people who are neurodivergent and working may not feel comfortable sharing their diagnosis, they may not have a diagnosis to share, they may be self-diagnosed, or they may not know neurodivergent at all.
The investment that you can make in an employee versus decide that they're not working out. And you factor in the math that to hire somebody to replace somebody is 2 to 3 times their salary.
The idea behind an accommodation is first and foremost to create equity on a team, create equity in the workplace so that somebody who is neurodivergent has the same ability and same tools to do their job as anybody else does.
Hello. You're tuning into the Careering with Cameron podcast, your safe place to ask all the dumb questions about finding a job.
Hey everybody, it's Kevin Cameron with Careering with Cameron, and I am joined today by Shea Belsky. Shea is going to talk to us about something that I have seen quite a bit of posts on LinkedIn and on Facebook, and that is how can we really be able to help our neurodivergent in terms of not only interviewing, but also the natural next step, which would be onboarding. And how do we make that process as fair as possible for all parties involved? And frankly, what does the timing look like in terms of when do we share some of the needs that we have? So Shea is going to cover quite a bit today. I'm looking forward to the conversation and really looking forward to hopefully helping much of our audience in terms of the needs that they're expressing and support. So Shea, welcome to the show.
Kevin, thank you for having me. Psyched to be here.
So Shea's going to share with us a little bit in terms of like what is happening right now in the workforce in terms of supporting or sadly not supporting our neurodivergent candidates that are coming in for interviews, as well as onboarding in the hiring process. It is a place where there's much support needed. Unfortunately, a lot of understanding that is missing. And so how do we make this a fair situation for all parties?
I think there's a really interesting thing to be said about what does somebody need to succeed in an interview. Every individual who's neurotypical, neurodivergent needs something. And something that I have struggled with as an autistic person is how do I articulate what I need to an interviewer, to someone who's doing interview prep or like a coordinator? And then how do I know that they're actually taking me seriously? They're going to be taking this to their higher ups, to the hiring manager, to whoever it is, and helping me focus on doing well in the interview and not actually biasing the outcome. Something that I've experienced and that countless other people experience is that if they disclose their neurodiversity during an interview, it may and often does have a bias or have an effect on the hiring outcome, which for the purposes of an interview, it generally shouldn't if all you need is accommodations for the interview. But unfortunately, we don't live in that world all the time, where sometimes the disclosure of any disability, not just neurodiversity, can have unintended or subconscious bias for whoever's involved. And as a result, that can skew hiring decisions. If you have somebody who's neurodivergent and really talented, really a great fit for the role, and they disclose that they have ADHD and need an accommodation, it's disclosed they have dyslexia or autism or something like that, they may unknowingly and unintentionally bias an interviewer in either direction and perhaps lead to an outcome that they weren't hoping for.
Yeah. And it's so challenging right now just to get through the screening into the interview that, you know, it's heartbreaking to then be at that point and have, unfortunately, somebody be not included in the selection process because of something that they shared. When do you think is a better time to share support that they may need through either working or maybe even through the interview process? So I guess there's 2 questions here. One is, what if there is support needed in the interview? And 2 is, what if there is not support needed in the interview, but there is support needed in the actual job?
I think you hit it on the head as far as needs. In the past, I have just said pretty freely and openly, I'm autistic, but not really having a point or reason behind it. And that's where a lot of that bias can come in. It's like, why are you telling me this? What do I do with this information? That's where there can be some more confusion. But if I say, I am autistic, and for this reason, if we are going to have like a conversation in a busy, crowded area, I need this conversation to be in a quiet area so that I can hear you. It frames it much more directly as a function of, I need this to have an equitable interview experience, and you need this to have equitable time interviewing me and getting information out of me. It's much easier to frame it as a function of, we both need this to do our job. You're here to conduct an interview. I'm here to be interviewed. And if one or both of us are compromised in our ability to do that, then it just doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So in the interview process, framing it purely as a function of needs and accommodations, that can happen as early as you need it to. And for the most part, if you're interviewing for a company, the recruiter will be like, oh, if you need accommodations, let us know. And typically the recruiter generally should know what to do with that information. Not always, but they should. And you had another point there is, what if you don't need them for the interview, but you do need them for the job? I think that's still important to note. And that would be something that I would talk just with the hiring manager about, because generally that's not something that a recruiter can help with, or anybody else who's not like a day-to-day manager. They're not going to be able to really do anything with that information. But if you have a manager who doesn't need to know, hey, this individual is autistic, and for that reason, maybe they struggle with communication, or maybe they have some sensory complications, or there's something else that's happening with an autistic individual, and the hiring manager will need to take them into consideration as part of their management. That's not to bias a decision to or not to hire them. It's more a matter of, can the hiring manager support them at all in the first place? Can they actually implement the accommodation? Can they do what has to be done for that employee? And sometimes, unfortunately, the answer is no. The hiring manager may want to, but they may not have the resources, ability, or the training to do that. But oftentimes the answer is yes, but the hiring manager does need to know that to my point earlier, to make an informed hiring choice. That is not to bias someone for being autistic. It's to inform if their needs can be met. And if they can't be met, they can't be met. You can't do anything about that.
Yeah. I think you made a great point early in what you were just sharing, which is, I think oftentimes, unfortunately, not everybody in the hiring process is trained on how to interview. Interviewing is not something that we go through orientation with a new employer and learn how to do at that point. So it's a matter of kind of catching up and figuring out, I guess, unless you're in HR. So the question that also becomes, and I think a lot of people are in this position, there is a fear of screwing up. So there's a big fear of like, what do I do, as you said, with this information? And, I think that if perhaps there was more training around the interview process, but also an understanding of, as you put it, sometimes you can make an accommodation, sometimes you can't. And that's unfortunately the way things are sometimes. But, I guess, would it be better to say, oh yeah, we'll make the accommodation and you'll be okay, but really not know how to do that and not be sure if you can, and then have the person not be successful in that role, frankly, because you were trying to do something that you really weren't set up to do. On the flip side, is it something where you're able to make the accommodation and therefore perhaps you're not listening to all of the facts in terms of what the person's going to need, because you're like, hey, this is no problem, we could just do this. Can we get back to like, how do we get through the fear thing? How do we get hiring managers who perhaps have not gone through the training? How do we help them to understand like how to interact? And that really, like, there's not like a mistake component here, unless you really take things sideways and completely ignore the fact that the person's asking for support.
Hiring managers and HR folks often see the process of accommodation or the process of creating that inclusion to be purely a cost center, an expense for an employee that does not have an immediately apparent benefit to the employee or to the team, when that could not be far from the truth. The idea behind an accommodation is first and foremost to create equity on a team, create equity in the workplace, so that somebody who is neurodivergent has the same ability and same tools to do their job as anybody else does. If somebody who's dyslexic needs different tools to do their job, those tools should be accessible to them. And that could be something like a more advanced grammar or writing tool than perhaps you have for every other employee. Maybe you pay for software for this employee who needs bespoke special help to write stuff. And that allows them to operate and do their job at the same level as all their other employees or better. Same for somebody with ADHD. Maybe you have them work with an executive functioning coach or some other sort of individual to help them with their day-to-day management, to help them not only build the skills, but build workplace or maybe role-specific things that will be helpful in this job, so that they can not only do what they have to do, but do a really good job of it. Accommodations are not a pure expense. You have a return on that expense for this individual being able to not only do a good job of the job, but hopefully do better than their other employees and excel, and then turn that around and help other people learn how to use these tools. Because perhaps for some of these individual technologies or tools or whatever it is, they could be beneficial for other people. Something that I hear about very often is a lot of people are using AI tools for writing and reading and information comprehension. They've been really helpful for me as far as breaking stuff down and saying, can you make this a little bit simpler, easier for me to understand? And obviously there's in a vacuum of putting company information into an arbitrary LLM. I know there's restrictions around that. So please, this does not be telling you to go dump company information into ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. But if you have access to those tools and want to make them a part of your workflow, or if you need to request permission to do so, it's certainly worth experimenting with to see, could this help me do my job better? And could I then help people who don't need this tool to encourage them to use it so they can do a better job at their job? So something that maybe is more of a need for me, but perhaps a want or an ad for somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I think about the investment that you can make in an employee versus decide that they're not working out. And you factor in the math that to hire somebody to replace somebody is 2 to 3 times their salary overall. Yep. It is nowhere near, I would imagine, what any type of support or accommodation would cost. So it's really very silly to think that that's the right answer. That's, I think, the first part of that. The second part of that would be, working with an organization to understand, like, and maybe this is part of the process in terms of the interview. Where are the points where we have the ability to support well? Where are the points where maybe we are not able to support well? Before you get into that interview process, so that you can speak to it, logically, in terms of like what's available.
I'm confused what your actual question is. Are you asking for names of organizations? Are you asking more for what a company can do? What is your question?
So that's a great kind of jump off there as well. Is what types of accommodations are most frequently asked for? I would say. Do you have an idea?
It depends a lot on if it's an interviewer versus on the job. For autistic people, for example, something that I know I struggle with, which is not universal to every person, but I know is largely beneficial, is making sure the environment is pretty like low sensory or low stimulating. Like for me, if we're going to be having a meeting in a meeting room, typically it's a meeting with just the interviewee, the interviewer, and maybe one other person. Mm-hmm. It's not in a loud, open environment. Sometimes we'll have like lunchtime conversations, which can't be in a loud environment, but I'll typically say, hey, can we have this in like a quiet room just so I can like hear you and have a conversation? It could be something like having work from home flexibility. I work from home every once in a while. I'm home right now. It could be wearing noise canceling headphones. It could be a coach I mentioned before. It could be better social awareness or social training, not just for them, but for people on the team. Those are a couple different like kinds of accommodations. The list goes on for a very long time. And there's also, taking it a step beyond accommodations, there's also like fundamental changes to how a workplace can function, which will benefit everybody. And though it may benefit neurodivergent people disproportionately more, it still benefits everybody. For example, there's lots of AI note-taking tools out these days. I have become very familiar and very, I wanted to say reliant, but certainly very enmeshed with my AI note-taking to help me focus on having a meeting and not have to worry about jotting stuff down in a notebook to come back and look at later. Like in my closet, I have stacks of notebooks from when I've had to be on a meeting and like jot stuff down and try to remember for later to go back to the notebook. I'm looking at this stuff and I can't make heads or tails of it. Right. But with AI note-taking tools, there's a billion of them. There's Granola, there's Jiminy, there's Fellow, there's a million of them. those have really been beneficial for me and for many other neurodivergent folks to focus on the meeting at hand on the conversation and let the note taker just listen in and then follow up with you later. And it connects to other AI tools as well, which has been really helpful. So there's cultural shifts like that. There's everybody can and should be using these tools or have access to this technology. That way it doesn't feel like we're singling out the one person. Another example could be a quiet room. My office has a quiet, low sensory room. I don't necessarily need permission to go in there. I could book it in advance, but anybody can do that. It's not just people who are on the list. It's anybody can do it, just first come, first serve. And I appreciate that a lot, that we have this space, but it does not necessarily feel like Shea's private space. It's not my space to own or to dictate. Anybody can use it, even if I use it more so than others. Anybody could go in and book it. So I think it's not just about accommodations. It's about what can we do as a workplace to allow anybody to have access to these things that will benefit them, whether it benefits one type of individual more so than others, doesn't matter, as long as everybody has the potential to benefit from it.
That's such a great point. And I love the fact that you tied it to the note-taking AI, because that seems like an area where many people are enjoying having AI note-taking, whether it's in video conference calls or on them in terms of conversations. And there's still a group, I think, that's like, no, I don't want my information online. I'm just gonna write it down. But the amount of freedom I think it gives you in terms of having that note-taking with you, not only, as you said, to make sure that you have great notes and be able to go back to them and make heads or tails out of them, because you're not looking at a sentence you wrote here or there, is really great. And everybody should be able to use that. How much of the work population at this point do you think? What percentage is neurodivergent right now?
As far as the working population, as far as the population in general, the statistic that I hear is 1 in 7 people around the world.
Okay.
I would imagine the working population there's a question there as far as the number of people who are of working age versus are actually in the workforce are two different answers. The number of people who are of working age, I would say, is probably pretty similar. But the number of people who are actually represented in the workforce, probably a lot less than 1 in 7, but still a lot more than you would think. I don't want to pull a number out of the sky and pretend that I can latch onto that answer.
Sure.
But it's less than 1 in 7 by a lot, but still a lot more than you think. For the reason that a lot of people who are neurodivergent and working may not feel comfortable sharing their diagnosis. They may not have a diagnosis to share. They may be self-diagnosed, or they may not know neurodivergent at all. Some people can go their entire childhoods and part of their adult lives without ever knowing they're neurodivergent at all. I've met so many people who have gone 30, 40 years and they come to some realization, they come into some information, and they decide to go get a diagnosis or they speak to a professional and like, oh, I actually have ADHD. Something that happens very often is that somebody will have kids, they'll have children, or they'll know somebody who does, and maybe their child has more pronounced neurodiversity, or they have more struggles or other comorbidities, and they get a diagnosis, and the doctor's like, by the way, you should get looked at as well. Mm-hmm. And the adult's like, no, what are you talking about? I don't have this thing. And it turns out they very much do. I know so many people whom they have had kids, they've gotten taken to a professional, and the doctor's like, hey, by the way, there's like a 99% chance you're also autistic. And then lo and behold, there you go. I've also found that neurodivergent people in relationships often attract each other unknowingly or unwittingly.
Interesting.
I know a lot of people who are autistic, ADHD, who come together for one reason or another in a relationship without knowing the other person is, or without one of those people in the relationships even knowing they're neurodivergent at all. It happens more often than you think.
Wow. That is so cool. Is there like any research beyond there in terms of why that happens?
I can't speak to the academic research, but I can speak to like anecdotes and what I've experienced. Sure. And I'm sure there is research out there as well about it. But I think a thing that I've experienced is that I think my mode of communication, the way that I express my words, how I emote, how I interact with the world, is a lot more compatible, I would say, with other autistic people. I think we're a little bit more direct, a little bit more forgiving, a little bit more emotional, and we kind of hand wave away a lot of the social stigmas and social rules that I think other neurotypical people sometimes run into. Like, one example is I know a couple autistic people who are like around my age who are at a similar level of independence. Like, they have a job, they drive a car, they're pretty independent, etc. And we each still have our own social difficulties. We're not all completely perfect, or at least we don't have the same level of social awareness or social comprehension of rules or things that you should do in a social setting that maybe neurotypical people do. My wife and I talk about that. She's like, you're friends with these people, but they said or did something that was maybe a little bit not kosher. And I'm like, well, yeah, like, I don't necessarily fault them for that. I don't think it makes sense either. And I explain why. And she's like, oh, that makes a little bit of sense. It doesn't change the fact that a neurotypical society views some rule or custom this way, and I kind of have to mask or force myself to adhere to this rule to, quote, blend in. But somebody who's maybe intentionally or unintentionally oblivious to these customs will choose to ignore them or not even know that they exist. And other people think that it's weird, and then the rest of us autistic people are like, well, why? Like, it just seems like a weird thing to have to do this specific thing. And I think that comes up very often as well.
I bet. In terms of the onboarding process, right? So let's moving beyond the interview process, the onboarding process. What types of things can employers do to make that process easier?
To make it easier, something that has benefited me a bunch of times has been better knowledge, better awareness of what are the resources I can take advantage of from day one. That could be, hey, there's a disability ERG at your organization, as neurodiversity community. We have a mentorship program. There's something that you can take advantage of to help people in a similar position as you come up to speed a little bit more quickly, or feel like they're more connected or more involved in their community based off of their identity. Previous organizations that I've been at, we've had mentorship programs for neurodivergent individuals, and those have been fantastic to help new neurodivergent employees come in and feel like they already have like a kind of a community, or they can kind of vibe and just ask someone to show them the ropes. I think that sense of empathy outside the scope of the relationship between an individual and their manager has been super helpful for me personally, and works wonders at any organization that just wants to help new employees feel like they belong. And that applies to any ERG too, not just neurodiversity or disability, but any ERG where people are coming together based off of the shared background, gender, racial identity, anything of that caliber, I think really applies, and especially to neurodiversity and disability.
Yeah. In terms of the hiring process and onboarding, the whole way through, I guess the follow-up question would be, what do companies do poorly in terms of onboarding? I mean, what are the things you hear about that you're like, oh, I wish you didn't do that?
Things that haven't worked for me and things that I know generally don't work is just not having any sort of like ramp up to the onboarding process. Some companies just be like, okay, here you go, have fun. Get kind of dropped into the deep end with no training whatsoever. That hurts everybody. That hurts neurotypical people too. For neurodivergent people especially, who aren't used to new things or new standards and new procedures, that can be extremely shocking, if not traumatizing. I've been at companies before where you just kind of dropped in with very little training and just kind of expected to figure it out. And in my past, and for many neurodivergent people, not every individual is a great figure it out type of person. They'll do fantastic when shown the ropes, when shown the rules, and have things explained to them and given like an onboarding or ramp up time. But if they have to hit the ground running and start going 60 miles an hour, that is a recipe for failure, if I've ever heard of one.
Yep.
And I don't think anybody wants to do that. Neurodivergent people especially don't want to have to sit down, figure it out, spin their wheels, ask everybody a bunch of questions. It's much more beneficial to every employee, neurotypical folks most especially, to have a much more ramp up for an onboarding, for figuring out who are you, what is your job, what resources do you have, here's your team, here's how they operate, and then empowering managers as well to be a part of that ramp up process. And my most recent job, I had a great ramp up process to getting up to speed at my organization, what my department does, what my team does, etc. But it was a fantastic way for me to get familiar with the business problem and how I contribute to that business problem.
That's fantastic. I love that. Okay. And I think it's leaning back to what you were talking about in terms of the quiet room and having everybody have access to it. It really raises the bar for the whole organization because everybody performs better if you have programs like mentorship and you have programs where people are actually onboarded. Makes for a much faster acclimation.
Exactly. We get it together, we don't get there at all. It's one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite movies is Hidden Figures. It's about African-American women contributing to the space race and contributing to getting man on the moon. And the analogy there of we all need to be here together. We can't let racism or sexism stop us from achieving these fantastic feats of science and math and engineering and technology. We need to be here together, and we can't let this obvious racism and sexism divide us. And that we're living that right now in neurodiversity. We can't let people's preconceptions or stereotypes of what an autistic person can or cannot do hold back an organization from being successful. So when Katherine Johnson's boss knocks down the sign which says colored women only and says everybody goes to the bathroom wherever they want to get their job done. Yep. It's one of my favorite quotes in that movie is, at NASA, we all pee the same color. I love that. I think that has very broad applications. Even if that scene never happened in history, it's still reflective of many things like that have happened and that unfortunately still do happen in this world. And if we continue to permit neurodivergent folks to be held back because of a lack of understanding or wanting to create an equitable environment, then we will only be as successful as that person who struggles the most.
That is a fantastic movie. I agree. Definitely in my top 5 for sure. The scene where he's... Sorry, go ahead.
It's a must watch. Also, it really is. When Catherine tears into the entire team of white men for singling her out, singling her, the smartest person in the room, singling her out. And then he's just like, I'm not dealing with this BS. We are going to do this together, and I'm not going to allow us to segregate this person.
Yeah. And the scene where there's a back and forth about why it's taking so long to finish the project, and she details out how far the bathroom is for her to go to.
Yep.
And it's just like this light bulb goes off in his head, like, what are we doing?
It's the same scene. I love that. That whole exchange, I think. Also, brilliant acting all around.
Yes.
And again, reflective of the tension and the stress that they were under in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a great example that everybody should watch, frankly. It's a really good movie. Okay, so we have learned quite a bit from you in terms of hiring, onboarding. If you could design any tool, have any type of support you were looking for, not just for you, just in general, that would help employees. I'm trying to think if I want to use the universal employees, or let's answer it 2 ways. Universal employees, but also the neurodivergent community, autistic community. What's something that you wish was there that would just make things so much easier?
I wish that every employee, neurotypical and neurodivergent, had the ability to more honestly and meaningfully express their needs and express what helps them work really well. And I mean that in a way that is honest and not like, this isn't me masking and kind of telling my employer what I think that they want to know, but more this is what I actually need, and having a chance to reflect and like do a back and forth and like actually iterate and discover this is what you actually need. Like cutting through all the layers of years of masking, of corporate padding, but like actually getting at the thick of it. This is what Shane needs to do a good job. And I'm saying this with conjecture, not talking about any specific person or company right now. I'm just conjecturing. Like, if I could go back and forth with something, anything, to really get at the heart of what I need as an individual, as a person, and then be able to take that to a job interview, to an employer, and have a really honest and frank conversation with it, I think everyone would feel a lot more confident about that. That's the sort of thing that benefits everybody it disproportionately benefits neurodivergent disabled employees more, anybody who's from an underrepresented group, to be honest with you, to help each individual understand this is what helps me feel like I belong. And that also has different meaning and different metric for some people. For some people, that is equity and inclusion. For some people, that is just let me do my job. For some people, that is I'm just here for a paycheck. For some people, it's career growth. That's different for every individual person. And I think sometimes we have this layer of masking for everybody, which like shows I'm here for one reason, but I say I'm here for a different reason. Let's like really cut to the chase and be honest, and then do something with that.
Yeah. I think I've got 2 follow-up questions on that. But the first one is, how do we train people to get that?
As far as training individuals, as far as training people to actually speak up and say something, oftentimes that honesty is prompted or it's forced out, sometimes in not great circumstances, and sometimes when they have that epiphany on their own. Someone may be forced to disclose and someone may be forced to talk about what they need if push comes to shove and are down to the wire or close to burning out. And often the way that actually ends up getting communicated could not fully explain the full impact of what's actually necessary. It could be not as effective as if they had done so calmly. And when it comes to somebody who is not under duress, I would say, if someone's just coming to it on their own or organically, that's also, I still think, a moment of reflection for them. Like, why am I talking about this? What's important for me to express? What does somebody need to know and do with that? If I am going to say to a manager, I need this to do my job, what am I expecting them to do? And if they aren't able to help me, then they can't help me. And so I need to be confident that they can actually do it. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah. I think the other piece of this is, I think that there's also part of the challenge is, how do you receive that messaging as the supervisor, boss, manager, whatever it may be? How do you receive that message and know kind of how to apply it and why it's being shared with you? What you've shared with us the whole way through this conversation has been, these are things that people need in order to be more effective and to, make it an even playing field in terms of all employees, but also to then take the employee base that you have working for you and give them the support that they need to do better. And that doesn't just identify one group. So what I'm trying to get to here is, hiring manager, when this is shared with you, it's not shared with you from the context of, oh, I'm going to make this hard for you. It's shared with you from the context of, I'm telling you what my superpower is and how you can help me to be better. And
exactly.
And I think too often it becomes like well, if we don't accommodate this, are we going to get sued? What's going to happen? Are we going to be in the paper? No, they're just sharing it so that you know how to support them. The end.
They're sharing it because this individual knows what it takes, knows what they are capable of, how they can really crush it and do well, but they need this thing or things to get there. Framing as a superpower is an interesting concept. I hear a lot of people say neurodiversity is my superpower, disability is my superpower. And I think that's not, it's not wrong for everybody, but it's not true for everybody either. Blanket saying neurodiversity is a superpower for everybody could be problematic for some individuals for whom disability is much more profound, has a much stronger impact. But for some individuals, that is true. And I think it's up to that person, that it's the onus is on them to say, this is what I'm really good at. To get there, I need these things. And again, that's true for everybody, but for neurodivergent people, what it takes to get there might be unorthodox.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. And certainly I learned, I hope our audience does as well. Shea, one of the questions I always ask guests on our show is, what's your why? What is the reason that you work so tirelessly in terms of this field and helping people to understand and really making it something that is hopefully more accepted in terms of hiring and onboarding and all that good stuff?
I want to try to help the world be a little bit easier for every neurodivergent person to have to pass through. There's folks out there who do this every waking moment, every waking breath. I don't think I'm one of those people as far as it being every single fiber of my being. But I do think it's very important for me as far as communicating effectively and trying to make the impact in the right way and knowing that I've made a difference, as opposed to being so broad as kind of stretch myself too thin. I think recently I've been being a lot more honest about like, what do I actually have to give in this regard? And how can I make sure that I'm maximizing my energy to make a meaningful difference and to actually know that people are hearing, people are listening, and then taking something away from it and doing something with it. And if I'm not confident that that's happening, I don't need to hear myself talk.
Right.
I want to know that I've made an impact. I'm not just doing this to stroke my ego. I think why I'm doing this is to make an impact and make a difference and actually motivate and inspire people to do something differently in their lives, in their workplace, whatever it is.
Okay. Last question, Shea. What do you hope our audience can take away from this conversation? What's the thing you really want them to hold on to?
There's many, many more neurodivergent people around you than you think, and all of them could benefit from just you lending an ear to them to ask, what can you as an individual do to help them be more successful in the workplace or just in life?
Love it. Fantastic. Shea, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed our conversation. Shea, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more or they want to connect with you to just chat?
I am all over the web. There is only one of me on the internet, Shea Belsky. If you search for my name, you will find it. I promise. There is only one of me. If you find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, my website, wherever, I'm there. It's whatever you're seeing is definitely me.
Okay. Sounds great. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks again, Shea. If you have enjoyed the show today, please make sure to give us 5 stars. Also, if this is something where you probably know somebody in your world who is neurodivergent, autistic, this hopefully will help you to understand how to better support them. If there's somebody that you think might be able to be helped with this podcast, share the podcast with them as well so they can go ahead and subscribe, and you can subscribe too. This was a great show. Shea, thanks again so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin.